Hey all, Tom Moran here from Tom's Big Spiders. A while back I put together a video of the best beginner tarantula species. I'd done a lot of homework on it, visited the forums, looked at the Facebook groups, tried to put together a list of some of the best species that you can recommend to somebody that's new to the hobby or just getting into the hobby. Well, since then there's been a lot of changes, things that aren't as available anymore. Some species I've kind of revised my opinion on, and I've been trying to think of a way to revisit this topic. Well, I came up with the idea of, let's not just put it on me, let's open it up to keepers out there and ask, what do you think are the best species as far as beginner species or ones that people just getting into the hobby can start with? And this video is going to be the results of it. So this was a lot of fun to put together, a lot of work to put together, but at least this isn't just my opinion. This isn't just one person's opinion. This is over 200 hobbyists giving their opinion on what species they either started with or would recommend to somebody who is just starting in the hobby. So enough of me. Let's get on and learn about the top 13 most recommended beginner species in the hobby. I put out the call and keepers answered. The question was a simple one on the surface. What are the top 3 favorite beginner tarantula species you would recommend to folks just getting into the hobby, or the ones you started with? There were a few caveats. First, I asked that folks please keep in mind temperament, ease of care, and availability when making their selections. Second, I asked that old world species, or species that can be defensive and that have more potent venom, not be considered, although there were still some recommended. For an explanation on why I didn't want to include Old World species, please give a listen to my podcast, Old Worlds as Beginner Species. Over 200 keepers, both established and new to the hobby, responded with their top picks. For purposes of giving higher selections more weight, I assigned each place a point value, with first choices getting 5 points, second choices getting 3 points, and third choices getting 1 point. The species were recorded, the points were tallied, and the list you're about to see represents the results. Now, before we move into the list, there are a few terms that we should define for clarity. First off, the word sling is the shortened version of spiderling, and it refers to a baby spider. Although the term is a bit arbitrary and subjective, it usually refers to the specimens between 0.3 to 1.5 inches or so. Although starting with a sling can be quite rewarding, they do come with a unique set of challenges for the new keeper. If you do choose to start with a baby, try to find one that's 3/4 of an inch or 1.9 centimeters or above, and feel free to check out my video series, The Ultimate Tarantula Sling Guide, for tips on what to expect. Also, there are 3 basic types of setups for tarantulas: terrestrial, arboreal, and fossorial. Terrestrial tarantulas live on the ground, so floor space is important when setting them up. Arboreal tarantulas live off the ground in trees and bushes, so they need enclosures that offer height over floor space. Fossorial spiders burrow to make their own dens. As a result, they require enclosures that allow for deep substrate. Now, if you're one of those folks who doesn't believe in beginner tarantulas, and there is definitely an argument against, this is unfortunately not the video for you. For my personal opinion on the matter, please give a listen to my podcast episode, Beginner Tarantula List, Beneficial or Misleading. For those who are currently looking for a tarantula species to start with, or just curious as to what species folks chose, here is the Baker's Dozen Top 10 Beginner Tarantula Species as chosen by hobbyists. Let's kick this list off with the spider that just made the cut. This tiny 8-legged sweetheart is often hailed by hobbyists as the single most friendly species available. Coming in at number 13 is the Homeoma chilensis, or the Chilean flame. This dwarf tarantula from Chile earned the hearts of keepers everywhere and jumped to the top of many beginner lists when wild-caught adult specimens flooded into the hobby in the 2010s. Described by many as inquisitive and curious, this friendly spider quickly developed a reputation for being one of the most tractable species available. Many keepers report that their specimens casually stroll out of their enclosures and into their hands whenever they open the cages for feedings or maintenance. Care for the species is simple, with most preferring dry enclosures that offer a few inches of substrate, a hide, and a water dish. Fortunately, Chile has since prohibited the exportation of this species, choking off the supply of wild-caught specimens. As a result, the only Chilean flames an interested keeper is likely to find for sale are captive-bred slings, and these can be difficult to come by. And, as these spiders are terribly tiny in the sling stage and are relatively slow growers, this can also be a turnoff to many new keepers. If you're looking for an older specimen, be willing to pay an arm, a leg, or possibly your firstborn child to procure one. Keeper Mike Hansen explains, except for availability and price, the Homeoma chilensis is a great beginner. It's almost too easy to handle them as they just walk out onto your hand when you open the enclosure. Although I originally had this species listed as number 2 on my list of best beginner species, lack of availability, the propensity for adults to fast, and the fact that slings can be quite stressful for a new keeper have it tumbling down my list. Still, those who have the patience to raise up one of these diminutive darlings will be rewarded with one of the friendliest spiders a hobbyist can keep. Next up, this fuzzy, multicolored arboreal species is the jewel of many a collection, and folks researching their first tarantula acquisition are often tickled to discover that they generally have a sweet disposition to match. Coming in at number 12 per your votes is the Carabina versicolor, or the Antilles pink-toed tarantula. Unlike many of the other species that will appear on this list, the C. versicolor, or Versi for short, is an arboreal species that makes its home in trees or in the banana plants of its native Antilles. As a result, this species needs a setup that supplies more height than floor space and plenty of cover provided by corkbark rounds, flats, and fake foliage. A heavy Weber, the C. versicolor will use the fake foliage as anchor points as it spins a hide from the white stuff. As slings, this species starts off as a little blue beauty before maturing into a fluffy adult sporting metallic greens, bright reds, and even some lavender and purple. This species is generally a good eater and will grow at a medium rate. Out of all the species that made the list, this is the one that gave me the greatest pause, as it tends to give new keepers fits. Unfortunately, the internet is rife with misleading and potentially dangerous husbandry guides that claim the species needs high humidity. This leads to stuffy, dank cages and many dead spiders. Those keeping the C. versicolor should provide plenty of cross-ventilation and lots of cover for their spiders, while providing moisture through a damp corner of substrate and a water dish. In fact, many hobbyists keep their adults on dry substrate with a water dish without issue. If you choose to pick up the spiders your first, be sure to do your homework and try to start with a larger specimen. Also, although many report that their specimens are quite laid back, temperaments will vary. Mine, for example, is quite skittish and would never tolerate handling. For many in the hobby, the adage bigger is better definitely applies when talking about giant hairy spiders. So it should come as no surprise that neophytes are often immediately enamored by the idea of keeping a spider that is as large across as a dinner plate. This is where number 11 comes into play. The next most recommended beginner species is the Lasiodora parahybana, or salmon bird eater. This beefy Brazilian terrestrial tarantula often comes to the attention of hobbyists who want spiders as large as the Goliath bird eater, but who don't feel ready for the more advanced husbandry requirements. The L. parahybana, or LP for short, is one of the largest spiders available, with some reporting that their adult specimens reach 11 inches in leg span. Although this species certainly could reach this size, 8 to 9 inches is much more probable. Hardy and very easy to care for, slings can be kept in a couple inches of moist substrate, where they will likely do some burrowing. As adults, they do well on dry substrate with a water dish. LPs are known for their amazing appetites and fast growth rates, so folks starting with a sling won't have long to wait until they have an imposing subadult. Sarah Kaler, 1995, states, I jumped into the hobby feet first with an LP, mainly because she was only $20. I love how laid back she is. She is out a lot and will sit patiently waiting for me to give her a roach. She has also put on a lot of size in the 9 months that I've had her. Normally a gentle giant, many keepers report adult specimens that are not only calm, but very visible and always out in the open. I've raised 4 LPs, 2 males and 2 females, and all were quite laid back as adults. A Lasiodora parahybana was also one of the first slings I ever attempted to raise, and it did just fine under my over-obsessive care. Hardy, fast-growing, and visible, the salmon bird eater can make a wonderful first foray into keeping tarantulas. Coming in at the number 10 spot is a spider that is near and dear to my heart, as I've had my girl for close to a quarter century. If you got into the hobby in the 1990s and early aughts, chances are that your first tarantula was the next species on the list. Coming in at number 10 is the Grammostola porteri or rosea, also commonly and amicably known as the rosehair tarantula. Once a hobby staple, adult G. roseas were exported out of their native Chile in mass numbers, where they were sold into the pet trade. Easily one of the most inexpensive and readily available tarantulas during their heyday in the 90s, the Rosie topped the majority of beginner lists as a species that was both very handleable and nigh unkillable. However, as the hobby grew and more species became readily available, this old hobby stalwart's popularity rapidly waned. Detractors point to its glacially slow growth rate, propensity to fast for long periods of time, and an unpredictable temperament that have earned some species the dubious moniker of psycho rosies. Currently, there are 2 versions of this spider in the hobby, the G. porteri or brown color form, and the G. rosea or red color form. Although they are commonly referred to as different species, rumor has it that an upcoming revision will have them both listed under G. rosea. Care is incredibly easy, as this spider does well in a terrestrial setup with bone-dry substrate, a hide, and a water dish. Often referred to as a pet rock, this isn't a particularly active species. Adults are always visible and will often sit in the same spot for days at a time. As for my take on this species, my first ever tarantula, the queen, was a G. Porteri, and she was the perfect introductory spider for me. Although I agree that the G. rosea is likely not the best beginner species available, it's definitely not the worst. Sentimentality aside, I think that 10th place is an appropriate spot for this wonderful spider. For folks looking to enter the hobby with something a little more spunky and exciting than the oft-recommended Grammostola and Brachypelma species, number 9 might be exactly what they are looking for. The next most recommended spider on the list is Acanthoscurria geniculata, or the giant white-kneed tarantula. Len Seymour states, Acanthoscurria geniculata are great, eat like pigs, and are great lookers, and I can't disagree. This large, heavy-bodied tarantula is easily recognized by the striking white banding and striping on its legs. With a max size of around 8 inches, this is one of the larger spiders on the list. Those who choose to start with a sling of this species will discover a hardy, fast-growing spider with an extraordinary feeding response. With higher temperatures, those who start with a 1-inch sling can easily expect a 4-inch spider sporting its adult colors in less than a year. This can be a huge perk to anyone turned off by some of the other beginner species' slow growth rates. Although slings of this species will definitely appreciate some moisture in the form of damp substrate and a water dish, adults have proven to be quite hardy and adaptable to many situations. Several inches of substrate, a hide, a moist corner, and a water dish should make for a happy spider. Temperament-wise, some adult specimens can be a bit high-strung, and the strong feeding response can be mistaken for aggression by new keepers, leading to some stress and fear from the unprepared. Keepers also need to be aware that this spider also sports some particularly potent urticating hairs, which it can kick if it feels threatened. As a result, this species did not make it to my original list, as I worried that some could find themselves overwhelmed by a fast-growing, large, potentially defensive spider. However, having spoken to many keepers who started with this gorgeous giant and had no issues, I revised my opinion and now embrace it as an appropriate beginner species. Coming in at number 8 is a tarantula species that offers medium growth rate, a spunky personality, and a stunning black and red color pattern. Hailing from Mexico, the 8th most recommended beginner tarantula is the Brachypelma vagans, or Mexican red rump. Although most of the species in the genus Brachypelma experience notoriously slow growth rates, the B. vagans are recognized for having a fantastic feeding response and medium growth rate. For folks who want to start with a sling but who don't want to wait several years before they are able to see some adult colors, the B. vagans definitely offers a solution. Care for this species is relatively easy, with slings and juveniles appreciating a bit of moist substrate and enough room to permit burrowing. Although some larger specimens may retain their burrowing tendencies, most do well in terrestrial setups with a hide, a few inches of substrate, and a water dish. Many will also appreciate a moist corner, although they seem to be quite adaptable to drier conditions as long as fresh water is available. Those expecting the typical calm and laid-back Brachypelma species should be aware that the B. vagans can exhibit quite the skittish personalities, with many reporting that their specimens are jumpy and excitable. I currently have 2 specimens, and although one is fairly even-tempered, the other is quite skittish and jumpy. However, new keepers who are aware of the potential for some speed and skittishness will be rewarded with a 6-inch black and red beauty of a spider. The 7th spot on this list is occupied by a spider that many consider to be the poster child of the hobby. Personally speaking, it was the first real-live tarantula I had ever seen, and it obviously had a profound effect on me. Coming in at number 7 is the Brachypelma hammeri, or the Mexican redknee. This striking tarantula species has been featured in many motion pictures over the years, making it one of the most recognizable species in the hobby. Very slow growing but incredibly beautiful, adult specimens are generally recognized as being quite calm and, in some cases, even handleable. As the B. hammeri is a hardy arid species, care is particularly simple, with adults thriving in a typical dry terrestrial setup. Although slings may do some burrowing and appreciate a bit of moisture, juveniles and adults are usually excellent showcase spiders, eschewing their burrows to sit out in the open. And it's a good thing that they lose their shyness, as this species, with its fiery red and orange knees contrasting against its black base color, is truly a stunner. Now, if there's a drawback to this species, it would be its slow growth rate. Those starting with slings will find that it'll usually be at least a couple years before they start to sport their adult colors. Also, although adults are usually calm, juveniles can be quite jumpy and prone to kicking hairs. However, those who take the plunge with this oft-recommended beginner species will enjoy this pet for a very, very long time, with males living up to 10 years and females thought to live 30 years or more. Furthermore, besides making it onto most beginner lists, this species is widely considered to be one every serious keeper should have in his or her collection. The sixth species on this list is one of only 2 arboreal or tree-dwelling species to make the cut. However, its wide availability and popularity with beginners make it an excellent inclusion. Number 6 on this list is the Avicularia, or pink-toed tarantula. Stroll into your favorite local box pet store and you're likely to find adult wild-caught specimens of one of these fuzzy and amicable tarantulas for sale. In fact, it's partly because of this mass availability that the Avicularia can count itself as one of the most popular first tarantulas. Luckily, its ease of care and generally calm temperament make this a good beginner species for keepers. As an arboreal tarantula, this species needs more height than floor space and benefits from a hide and plenty of foliage for cover and for anchor points for its webbing. However, folks should be aware that this is not a heavy webbing species, and some specimens will lay down very little of the white stuff. Despite many erroneous care sheets that label this species as one that needs high humidity, seasoned keepers now believe that this species thrives with good ventilation and a water dish. Some keepers choose to mist down a side of the enclosure and the foliage on occasion to give their spider another place to drink from. When shopping for an Avicularia, hobbyists are likely to run into a species labeled A metallica. This Avicularia is now considered to be a color morph of the Avicularia, morphotype 6 to be exact, and as a result, the care is identical. Those who procure this species will notice a wonderful metallic sheen to the animal, with hairs that almost look like they are tipped with fiber optic lights. Due to the vast amount of terrible husbandry information out there for this species, and the fact that younger specimens can be a bit less tolerant of husbandry mistakes, I had this species a bit lower on my list. However, for prepared hobbyists that have done their homework, the Avicularia can be an awesome introduction to the hobby. One of 3 Grammostola species that made it to the list, this next spider is one of my personal all-time favorite species and one of the potentially largest to make the cut. Coming in at number 5 is the Goopolekirbys, or Chaco golden knee. Hailing from the Gran Chaco or Dry Chaco, a hot and semi-arid region spanning parts of Bolivia, Paraguay, and Argentina, the Goopolekirbys is a stunning species easily recognized by the striking golden stripes that adorn its knees. With adult females reaching a max size of 7 inches or so, this gentle giant is almost always visible as an adult, therefore making it an awesome showcase spider. Although slings and juveniles can be a bit skittish, most folks report that their adult specimens are quite calm and even tractable. I currently have 4, including a mature male, and all of them are total sweethearts. As the species is readily available, specimens usually tend to be rather inexpensive. For those keeping smaller specimens, expect some burrowing. Many Goopolekirbys keepers refer to their spiders as bulldozers due to the fact that they are constantly moving substrate and a seemingly never-ending attempt to alter their environment. As for negatives, folks keeping teeny tiny slings can expect glacially slow growth rates before their spiders hit about the 1-inch mark. I would encourage someone just starting out to try to find a larger specimen, around 3/4 of an inch or 1.9 centimeters or so. However, those new to the hobby looking for an easy to care for, beautiful, and sometimes tractable tarantula, you would be hard-pressed to do better than the Goopolekirbys. Next on the list is a gorgeous little blonde fluffball hailing from the United States. Coming in at number 4 is the Palma calcotus, or Arizona blonde. Being native to the U.S., this species is very readily available in North America, with both captive-bred slings and unfortunately wild-caught adult specimens offered by dealers frequently. Fans of the species are enticed by its beautiful appearance and often calm and friendly demeanor. Richard Stewart from Tarantula Collective states, when people ask me this question, I usually suggest a Palma calcotus because they're gorgeous and all of them I've ever had have been very calm, relaxed, and slow-moving. They're also easy to care for, rarely kick hairs, and have an understated beauty, and are usually out on display a lot as adults. As a result, this popular species shows up on many best beginner species tarantulas lists. Most specimens will do well in a basic terrestrial setup, although some have reported that their adult wild-caught specimens appreciate some substrate depth for burrowing. As with other species on this list, A. calcotus slings tend to be tiny. Couple this with one of the slowest growth rates of any species, and you have the potential for frustrated newbies as they impatiently wait for their spider to show some adult characteristics. Also, like the aforementioned G. porteri rosea, the Ophanopelma chalcodes has a bit of a reputation for vastly varied temperaments between specimens. For every keeper that reports a handleable and cuddly little ball of fluff, there seems to be one that reports a skittish, hair-kicking demon. I've personally kept two larger specimens, and one was fairly laid back but would kick hairs whenever disturbed. The other is currently a little madwoman who dashes around her enclosure when I open it. Still, the overwhelming support this species got in the polls illustrates that, more often than not, the egg chalcodes makes an excellent introductory spider. Now, while it's the blue tarantulas that seem to get all of the attention, especially from beginners, it's not always about the bright colors. In fact, one of the most stunning and sought-after tarantulas in the hobby technically sports an absolute absence of color. The third most recommended beginner tarantula species is the Grammostola pulchra or kirigai, the Brazilian or Uruguayan black. This shimmering ebony beauty has been referred to as the black lab of tarantulas due to its beefy build and gentle disposition. A rather slow-growing species, females can live for decades while the males can make it to 8 years. This means that folks purchasing a sling will enjoy many years with this animal regardless of the sex. As with all species on this list, the G. kirigai is quite hardy and easy to care for. Although slings will do a bit of burrowing, adults abandon their burrows, becoming excellent terrestrial showcase spiders in the process. Now, as for why we're using both G. pulchra and G. kirigai to refer to one spider, that can be chalked up to hobby misidentification. You see, the Brazilian species that hobbyists have been referring to as the Grammostola pulchra for years was revealed to actually be the Uruguayan Grammostola kirigai. That's right, your Brazilian black is now an Uruguayan black. Still, the Shakespearean quote, "A tarantula by any other name would look as good," definitely applies here, as both spiders are nearly identical and equally as stunning. As for drawbacks, the slow growth rates can be frustrating for those starting with slings. Also, this species can be hard to come by in some countries, like the United States, and as a result, slings and adults are both quite expensive. But besides those two knocks, this popular species has a heck of a lot to offer folks looking for a good starter spider. As I had this species as number 4 in my original list, I certainly wouldn't argue its top 3 position. Coming in at number 2 is one of only a handful of tarantula species frequently referred to by its common name initials. This polychromatic looker is also one of the few New World tarantula species that sport some of the striking blue coloring that makes keepers drool. Have you guessed it yet? The number 2 tarantula receiving the second most votes overall and the second most first place votes is Chromatopelma cyaneopubescens, or the green bottle blue, or GBB for short. This stunning spider is one of the true jewels of the hobby, sporting blue legs, a metallic green carapace, and an orange abdomen. In arid species, the GBB is one of the most hardy tarantulas available, with even the slings doing well in drier conditions. Known for its voracious appetite and amazing hunting response, this spider is also a fairly fast-growing animal, maturing from a gorgeous sling to a handsome adult in a few years. As a result, this species is often recommended to folks looking to raise their first spiderling. Fans of heavy webbing will also find a lot to love with this tarantula, as they are known to blanket their enclosures with the white stuff. Many keepers give their GBBs a bit of extra height in their enclosures to allow more space for the silk. Stephanie Porter states green bottle blue is my favorite, and I think many would agree. Now, I must sheepishly admit to having this species much lower on my list at number 12, as there are some caveats that new hobbyists need to be aware of. Unlike many of the other species on this list, the C. cyaneopubescens is generally recognized to be quite fast and very skittish for a New World species. Some folks, myself included, have specimens that won't hesitate to bolt or to kick hairs if disturbed. These behaviors can be quite intimidating to some new hobbyists, and this should be considered a hands-off spider. Those aware of the species' speed and slightly more defensive disposition will find plenty to love about the C. cyaneopubescens, which is why keepers have voted it the runner-up in the best beginner tarantula species list. Now, before we get to the most recommended beginner tarantula species, let's take a moment to review some of the more notable species that didn't quite make the cut, but that can still make for wonderful introductory spiders. First up on the runners-up list is Ophanopelma seemanni, or the Costa Rican zebra tarantula. This one just missed the cut, which is a bit of a shame as many count this gorgeous species among one of the best beginners. In fact, my second tarantula ever was an A. seemanni, and I did just fine with mine. This hardy species can have a black, brown, or even blue base color with striking white off-white stripes on its legs. They are readily available, with adult specimens often being sold in pet stores. Unfortunately, a skittish personality coupled with the propensity of some specimens to burrow could provide a sharper learning curve than new keepers. Next up is Eupalacerus campistratus, or the pink zebra beauty, or PZB for short. This little spider offers many of the same perks as the Grammostola and Brachypelma species that made this list, and adults are renowned for being incredibly calm and handleable. As an added plus, their pink hairs make them extra adorable. So why the omission from the list? Sadly, it comes down to availability. The PZB is rarely available, with slings seemingly appearing on the market every couple of years. Personally, I love my specimens, and I originally had them at number 3 on the list I did 3 years ago, but they have unfortunately been scarce since then. My advice to keepers, if you see them offered again, snatch one up. And finally, just missing the cutoff was the Brachypelma Bambi, or Mexican fireleg. This stunning species is one of the faster growing Brachypelma species, meaning folks that start with slings won't have to wait quite as long for their specimen to sport those glorious red and orange legs. They are also quite hardy and easy to keep. For downsides, many report that their specimens are very skittish and quick to kick hairs, and those hairs can be particularly nasty. And now, the moment everyone has been waiting for, the tarantula species most recommended by hobbyists to those just starting out in the hobby. For those of you with some experience who have been paying attention, this species shouldn't come as much of a shock. The number 1 most recommended beginner tarantula is Brachypelma albopilosum, the curly-haired tarantula. This fuzzy and amicable terrestrial species, known for its adorable and perpetual bad hair day, was the overwhelming number 1 choice, being first in both of the number of recommendations and the number of people who rated it their first pick. Folks who chose this species gushed about its ease of care, gentle temperament, and adorable appearance. B. albopilosum has long been recognized as one of the most consistently docile species from specimen to specimen, and adults especially tend to be laid back and quite visible. This spider is normally a voracious eater with a medium growth rate, so folks who start with slings won't have too long to wait before they have a hairy little ball of fluff. As an added bonus, this species is readily available in the hobby, and both slings and adults are usually quite inexpensive. Now, it should be mentioned that there are currently 2 variants of this species available in the pet trade: the hobby form Honduran curly hair, which is suspected to be highly hybridized, and the pure Nicaraguan curly hair. Some folks have noted that wild-caught Nicaraguan species can be a bit more high-strung and appreciative of moisture. However, many keepers have reported little to no variation between the temperaments of the 2 forms. Be sure to properly research the care of each before picking one up. And you can add my vote to Team B. albo, as this species was my number 1 pick on my best beginner species list. I currently have 5, including a Nicaraguan, and all are great eaters with relaxed attitudes. When folks express interest in easing into the hobby by keeping an attractive, hardy, readily available, and generally laid-back tarantula, the B. albopilosum always gets my enthusiastic vote. So there you have it, the top 13 most recommended beginner tarantula species as determined by you, the fine folks who keep them. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that, found it informative. For those of you who obviously are not beginners, hopefully you just found it fun to find out what people voted on. For those who are beginners, hopefully this gives you a place to start when you go and pick up your first tarantula. And I'd just like to thank a few people. Without their help, I could not have put this video together. So first off, a few of my patrons: Tarantula Tink, Stuart Bias, and Dan Pompili. Thanks so much for helping me out. Then, obviously, for Avicularia, those weren't all mine. I would like to thank Ian Tarantula, Dan Mckee, Bambi Kelly, Jaime Delong, and Dylan Baker, or the Tarantula Lair. I told him I'd mention his business page as well. Thanks so much, guys, for offering me the footage. I really appreciate it. I really could not have done this video without these people, so thank you. So that'll do it for this one. I think that pretty much explains itself. If you're somebody who already has tarantulas and knows about them, then you can probably stop here. If you're somebody who just stumbled on this video and you now have an idea of which species you'd like to check out, I do offer a lot of husbandry videos. I've kept every single one of these species and raised them to adulthood, so I do know what I'm talking about, I think. And I would love to offer that you go and peruse some of my other videos and check out, see if there's something there that you might find helpful. So if you enjoyed the video enough that you'd like to subscribe and keep track of what I'm doing, you can click that right up there. If you want to check out my playlist that features the beginner species husbandry videos, it's going to be right up there. If you want to just look at general husbandry videos, I'm going to put it down in here. And if you like to look at my beginner guides, I have quite a few of them. You can check them out in here. As always, thanks so much for watching. Hope to see you guys in the comments section. We'll catch you all next time.